Shame, chronic shame, is one of the most complex, corrosive, and immobilizing emotions. It often underlies pain, anxiety, and depression. Shame is like a cancer, like a tumor that grows from the injury of trauma and the wound of betrayal. This interpersonal trauma becomes deeply lodged in the body-mind and then metastasizes, infecting all aspects of a person's life. They include a loss of connection with our authentic, spontaneous self, as well as with our basic sense of goodness, rightness, and belonging in the world. I believe that there are two main sources of toxic shame. The first is when we're traumatized, abused, and humiliated as young children. We experience this as an overall sense of badness that something is fundamentally wrong with us. The second is the fear that comes from being ostracized from a group. And this can happen at different ages. For a young child, it's as though the only way we can make sense of how poorly we've been treated, how we've been mistreated, especially by those who are supposed to take care, cherish, and love us, is to lay the blame on our own badness. In other words, the way that we try to make sense of this is to somehow assume that we were the cause of that abuse and that shaming and that humiliation. And this allows the child to imagine that they have some small modicum of control in an otherwise incontrollable situation. Of course, these core beliefs are the words and explanations of the adult. So I'm speaking them from the child, but the child, their mind is very different than the adult mind. And for children, it's this primitive internalized deduction that occurs without words, context, or even thoughts. It's just an overwhelming, oppressive sensation of our own badness. But again, at least it gives us some modicum of control, because if we were the cause of it, then somehow maybe we could alleviate some of that shame. The child somehow senses that we need our parents for us to survive. If it's them that are the bad ones, then we won't survive, because we need them for our survival. So better us than them to carry the badness. It is an implicit survival strategy to regard the parent as essentially a good caretaker. This sometimes leads to what's called splitting. That it's like we have one parent who is the bad parent, who is only bad. And the other parent in our mind is the good parent. And so rather than being able to hold them together, they split into those parts. So let's look at the second major cause of shame, which is being ostracized from a group, be it family, colleagues, friends, or peers. Rejection is among the most painful of human emotions. Anyone who has felt the sting of rejection, ostracism, or shunning knows how deeply these experiences sting and how they just rip us apart, and also how long that pain can last. This shame feels like death because in tribal or primitive groupings, if one member is being ostracized for not living up to, not obeying the norms of the group, they may perish. For example, if a member of a primate family group is banished or shunned, they may literally die, and they're not able to attach to another group they will simply wither and die. You know, the voodoo death, it's not about putting the needles in the doll. It's about ostracizing that person who's being hexed. And because that's so severe and the body gets so shut down, they may actually perish and die, but again, not by the needles, but by the banishment, and how profoundly that immobilizes us. This social bind makes us particularly vulnerable to shame around the age of adolescence. At this age, peer groups become so vitally important, and exclusion feels like you're dying of shame and humiliation. If you kind of visit your adolescence and your pre-adolescence, how did it feel when you were excluded by high school friends or colleagues or family members? It can just be excruciating for any of us. And you see kids like this, you know, you have one friend and they're your best friend, and then all of a sudden they don't even talk to you and somebody else is their best friend. God, that really, really hurts. It feels horrible. It feels maybe even like death, because again, banishment is about the likelihood of death. I suggest that you might think about, from your current adult stance, what you would want to say to yourself as an adolescent, what you would want to say to reassure her, him, or them that their pain and humiliation won't go on forever, that they will survive it, and that you'll be there for them. So just take some time now, some moments, to envision yourself as an adolescent or as a pre-adolescent. And just what words would you want to say to them? What would you want to tell them? What would you want them to know from your stance as an adult, from your heart, from your being? And see how that feels inside. What kinds of sensations, feelings, images, or thoughts come up for you, come up in your mind. As you console your adolescent self, consider journaling about these feelings and thoughts and sensations. Whatever the cause of our shame, it is important. No, it's critical to understand that our bodies respond in specific ways to this kind of emotional injury. When we continue to hold these emotional postures of shame, which we'll be talking about now, and the horrible feelings of humiliation will get regurgitated over and over again. So now, how do we break this vicious cycle? Here's an exercise to help working when feelings of shame or humiliation come up. Well, you know, they're there all the time, of course. So the idea is to notice that the content and the corrosive nature of shame, that's also important, but what's really important, and which gives us the way of moving out of the shame, is that shame is something that happens specifically in our bodies.
I know you're tired. I know you think none of this matters, that no one sees you, that no one gets it, that the weight sitting on your chest is just how it is, how it's always going to be. But it's not. I swear to you, it's not. I'm not going to tell you it gets easier in some magical, overnight way. I'm not going to lie and say there's some moment where everything just clicks and you wake up weightless. Nah, but there are moments, small, quiet ones, where you realize you're still here. And that matters. That's everything. You think the pain is permanent, that the humiliation, the way it burns inside your ribs, has carved itself into you, that it's your shape now. But you are not made of this. I promise. What they say about you, what they whisper, what they laugh about when you walk past, it's not you. It never was. You are not the way they see you. You are not the mistakes, the awkwardness, the moments that replay in your mind at 2 a.m. Like some kind of cruel home movie. And the shame? That awful, crushing thing? It feels like it owns you. But it's just a ghost. A trick your body plays on you. It makes you shrink, makes you fold in on yourself like you're something that needs to be hidden. But you don't. You never did. Stand up. Even if it hurts. Even if you don't want to. Because I see you. And I'm here. And one day you'll see me, the you that survived. The you that made it through. And you'll understand. You're going to make it. You're going to be more than fine. You just have to keep walking. One step, then another. That's all I ask.
This guy came in, and this was when I was doing mind-body work in the 60s. He came in and he was having real jaw problems. His jaw was just rigid. He had TMJ. So I was working with those muscles, helping him to relax the jaw muscles. And then all of a sudden this image came up. He had wanted to be promoted in his job. And it looked like this other person was kind of making nice with the boss. And so he felt like he wanted to kill this guy, fight. But he couldn't do that, of course. Obviously, he had to stuff it, but his jaw had it. So as he released his jaw, that's when the whole image and his perceived threat from another person, just about a job promotion, but it was perceived threat. I think there are a lot of reasons why we get stuck. Using this simple example of the guy, socially it would be inappropriate. It would have caused him all kinds of problems. So he needed to suppress that anger, and you suppress it with the muscles. This is what Wilhelm Reich talked about, armoring. So you have this unacceptable feeling, so you armor against that feeling. In this case, it was in his jaw. And actually the way it came out, he had this image actually of biting this guy. I mean, how primal can you get? Yeah. So, and other reasons are, again, it's socially unacceptable. And the other thing is we're afraid of the energy that's locked in our bracing responses and our freeze responses. And so the very sensations that will help take us out of the freeze response, back into balance, into equilibrium, into inner regulation, those sensations are frightening often to a person. And so they stop those sensations from happening, but it's the very sensations that will take them out of the freeze response that they're stopping. Maybe this person who was passed over for a promotion, maybe he even starts talking about, that he was really, he just was so upset that that this other person got promoted and that he didn't. And so while he's talking, I see his jaw starting to stiffen. I see his shoulders starting to come up. And then I might say, I'm just wondering if you're noticing what's happening in your jaw or your shoulders just while you're talking about this. We can talk about it. Let's just put the talk about it, just put it to the side for a few moments, and you can come back to it anytime you want. But just see what you're noticing right now in your jaw. Then I might have them do some kind of movements like just opening the jaw till you feel a increase in the resistance, in the tension, then letting the jaw close a little bit, then letting it open a little bit more, and then letting it close. And then again, every time there's a release of activation, a release of energy, just encourage the client. So just noticing those sensations. Maybe they report tingling. Just notice the tingling. Notice if it increases, if it decreases, or if it changes, if it stays the same, or if it changes to something else. So again, it's working with the energy the activation that's got locked in to those frozen muscles. That's really the key. It really is.
All right, so here's what I've learned: the body never really forgets. Even when I thought I'd moved on, when I told myself I was fine, my body was still holding it. Every clenched jaw, every stiff shoulder, every random ache that came out of nowhere, it was all the things I never let myself feel. For the longest time, I thought I had to be in control. That certain emotions, anger, sadness, even excitement, were too much. That if I let them out, something bad would happen. So I swallowed them down, locked them away. Thought if I ignored them long enough, they'd just disappear. But they didn't. They just got stored. In my muscles. My posture. The way my stomach tensed every time I felt like I was on shaky ground. I didn't even notice it half the time, until I did. Until I realized I wasn't just stressed or tense. I was armored. And that's the wild part, this armor I built to protect myself. It was also keeping me stuck. Every time I got close to actually feeling something, my body would shut it down. A headache, a tight jaw, a wave of exhaustion. Like some part of me was terrified of what would happen if I actually let go. But here's the thing, I didn't need to fight my way out. I just needed to listen, to pay attention, to notice when my shoulders were creeping up, when my breath was shallow, when my fists were clenched for no reason. And instead of forcing myself to relax, because let's be real, that never works, I just let myself feel what was there. At first, it was terrifying. My whole body would resist, like, nope, we are not doing this today. But the more I let myself sit with it, the more I realized nothing bad was actually happening. The world wasn't ending just because I let my jaw unclench. My body wasn't betraying me, it was just trying to finish something. And that's when I got it. The sensations I'd been avoiding, the tension, the tingling, even the weird heat in my chest when I was frustrated, those weren't the enemy. They were the way out, the release, the unwinding. I'm still figuring it out, still catching myself when I start to lock up again. But at least now I know the signs. I know my body isn't working against me. It's just been waiting for me to finally listen.
What makes it ultimately more complex and more difficult is that often the perpetrator is the parent or is a family member. That's much more common than a stranger. And so the person who is biologically supposed to protect us and to comfort us is the person that's harming us. So that creates a tremendous conflict. And when I believe it's critical to work both with the child, of course, but also with the parent. And even if the parent or the family member wasn't the abuser, they feel so much guilt and so much shame. And of course, the child feels so much shame. But one of the things that, again, works very well somatically, we're talking about touch, but a lot of times we don't really touch, but we touch with our presence. We touch with our being. So, in therapy, you can't really, you certainly initially can't really touch somebody who's had that kind of trauma, because the way they'll interpret that is, in the way of the trauma. So you're really just, in a sense, kind of adding to that confusion. But it's critical that they feel enough safety with you, the therapist. They must feel enough safety with you. And most therapists, I think, are fairly good at this. But what's also necessary is that you help the person get tools right from the get-go. Tools that they can use to regulate themselves, to let these energies, the sensations settle. And when they have those tools, they are not as dependent on the therapist, because very often, the person will come to see the therapist, and the therapist will be attentive, will really be present for them, and they'll leave feeling, oh my God, what a relief, somebody is there for me. But then when they are at home, or something happens, then they're thrown back in the same chaos, the same despair, and they feel even more despair, because they're they're more dependent on the therapist, right? And it's difficult because when you've had such an experience with people you were dependent on, you certainly don't want to be dependent. But I think it's a key in holding that balance, that of course they are dependent on us to a degree as therapists because we know things they don't know. And the way they do, you're dependent on the doctor. I mean, you hopefully can ask the doctor good questions and ask, well, this procedure versus that procedure, what are the pluses, what are the minuses? But you're relying on somebody who has a body of knowledge that you don't have. But at the same time, the person has this deep wisdom within them. So if the therapist helps them connect to that, then they start feeling more empowered and they're able to work more effectively. At least that's my experience with the therapist, because they can practice these things at home. They can gain their own strength, their own capacity in partnership with the therapist. So I see it very much as a partnership. Somebody told me that therapist, that the root meaning of therapist is fellow traveler on the road. And I think that's the essence of a productive therapeutic relationship. But in that book, Healing Trauma, I think it's called A Pioneering Program for Restoring the Wisdom of Your Body. It sounds true, gave it the name, not me. And I try to really, again, explain, give them education about what's happening, why they might be feeling this way, the very nature of trauma, with both the text of the book and the CD to help guide them so they could start to experience some of these things. Again, many people got help, I'm sure, who weren't seeing therapists. But when you have severe early trauma, there's no getting around it. You need to have a competent therapist to work with. And even, or especially then, but many of the people were able the clients were able to use these exercises and use my guiding of them through these exercises to develop more of their own capacity, of their own authentic autonomy. So working again with partnership with the therapist. So as I say, in these last 20 years, I've put a lot of my focus on trying to make tools that people can use to support their own healing.
So here's what I want to leave you with. Healing isn't about fixing yourself, because you were never broken. What happened to you is real and unfair, and maybe even unbearable at times. But you survived it. And that means something. That means everything. The hardest part of healing isn't remembering. It's not even the pain. It's the loneliness. The feeling that no one could possibly understand what it's like to carry what you carry. But you're not alone. You never were. Healing isn't something someone else does to you. It's something you reclaim, piece by piece, breath by breath. It's in the small moments, the times you show yourself kindness when your mind is telling you that you don't deserve it. The times you let yourself feel without shutting down. The times you remind yourself that safety, real safety, is possible. And yeah, it takes time. Sometimes, it feels like you're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe even 3 steps back. But forward is forward. You are still moving, still growing, still here. And that means healing is already happening. You don't have to do this alone. But you also don't have to give your power away to anyone, not even to the people helping you. The strength, the wisdom, the capacity to heal, it's already inside you. You just have to trust yourself enough to reach for it. So if no one's told you this today, you're doing amazing. Healing isn't easy, but you're here, you're showing up for yourself, and that's everything. Just remember, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep going, 1 step at a time. If this resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, or just let us know you're here. And if you want more tools, insights, and support for your mental health journey, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Inside Serene. Because healing isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving. And you deserve that.